The dynamic between Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White is very interesting because clearly it's a relationship with a basis of respect. I mean, when Stephanie White was hired, Clark was thrilled, super excited. And coach said all the right things about coming in and coaching the Fever and coaching Caitlin Clark. Then, fairly early in the season, I would say there was a bit of a philosophical divide, but it never got to be completely worked out, right? And it wasn't as if they were at odds, but I noticed when they would talk about things, and for instance, when Caitlin Clark had come back from one of her injuries. And
Caitlin Clark openly said the words on national television that sent immediate shockwaves through the league. While discussing her role after returning from injury, she acknowledged Stephanie White's coaching points about setting stronger screens and moving more off the ball, but her tone quickly shifted to a firm, almost defiant clarity as she repeated her belief. "I'm at my best when the ball is in my hands." It wasn't just a comment. It was a direct challenge to her head coach's entire philosophy. The message was unmistakable, a public declaration of disagreement that created instant, visible tension and threatened to disrupt their dynamic before it could truly take shape. The silence that followed said it all, exposing a deep strategic divide for the entire world to see.
And it wasn't as if they were at odds, but I noticed when they would talk about things, and for instance, when Caitlin Clark had come back from one of her injuries and Ari McDonald was there and they were asking about playing together, and Clark referenced some of the talking points Stephanie White has made, like being a better screener, about playing off ball, but then she, reiterated that she's at the best with the ball in her hands. And that reminded me of when I was there for the Liberty game, the first Liberty game that Clark got hurt in, not the one that she came back and exploded in. And before that game, there was a little bit of a hint of,
Stephanie White's initial hire was greeted with much enthusiasm, particularly by Clark, who was apparently ecstatic. When White came, she embraced her star player and said all the appropriate things about coaching the Fever. However, the honeymoon was exceedingly brief. A clear philosophical divide appeared rather early in the season. A basic difference on how the group, and Clark in particular, ought to function. There was an unresolved conflict simmering beneath the surface rather than an open conflict. Fans soon noticed a fissure in the foundation. There was no denying the early appreciation, but the fractures appeared almost quickly, pointing at more serious problems to come.
And then fans took that and turned it into Stephanie White will destroy Caitlin Clark and all that. We never got a chance to see them completely gel. When Clark had come back, even when she was playing hobbled before the groin injury that ultimately ended her season when the ankle injury compounded it, the Fever were rolling. They had won a couple of games in a row there, but not only just did they win them, they looked like a machine. And that was with Clark struggling to shoot because she was obviously hobbled with injuries. But then when the Fever go on and they win without Caitlin Clark, and clearly Stephanie White proves she's a hell of a coach, and the rest of the team steps up, Clark celebrated.
When Clark, who was recuperating from an injury, was asked about her role alongside partner Erica Wheeler, it was the first notable public display of this division. She gave lip respect to White's advice to become a better screener and play off the ball. However, the true Caitlin Clark eventually surfaced. She reiterated that she performed at her best when she was in possession of the ball, leading the attack and setting the pace. It wasn't just a preference. It was a clear statement of who she was as a player. Apparently at odds with the team approach White was trying to put into practice. It seemed more like a silent rejection on a highly visible platform than an adaptation.
The Fever go on and they win without Caitlin Clark, and clearly Stephanie White proves she's a hell of a coach, and the rest of the team steps up. Clark celebrated in that moment. And I know for a fact that they have a good relationship, right? So it's just intriguing because they never got a chance to fully flesh out their on-court relationship. They have a great off-court relationship, and so much has been made of their relationship since without us having a chance to actually see the substance. And then when Stephanie White says anything, it gets run with, like when she had talked about how important Kelsey Mitchell was to the team. I don't even forget the
An even earlier, possibly more subdued altercation prior to a crucial Liberty game was reflected in this public exchange. White had emphasized the significance of Clark playing off the ball once more, presenting it as a means of providing her with a respite and enhancing the team's general flow. Despite being kind, Clark's remark had a similar undercurrent of opposition. She acknowledged the possible advantages, a rapid recipe, and team support, but she soon returned to her fundamental convictions. When she is leading the offense, she is at her most effective and productive. It was evident that this was more than a tactical argument when she had the ball firmly under her grasp. It was an impending power struggle between basic basketball ideas.
You see the substance. And then when Stephanie White says anything, it gets run with, like when she had talked about how important Kelsey Mitchell was to the team. I don't even forget the exact comments, but it was the most innocent comment ever, especially when they're trying to re-sign Kelsey Mitchell in free agency. But it's like, well, she didn't say Caitlin Clark was the be-all, end-all of everything all the time, and therefore she, hates her. But regardless, Stephanie White was on with Sue Bird on her Bird's Eye View podcast and specifically talked about Caitlin Clark and said some things that I think fans will like to hear, especially coming from her.
How important was it to forge that relationship with her?
These subtle conversations were picked up by fans and the media, who then turned them into a full-fledged conflict story. Headlines implying Stephanie White was purposefully attempting to ruin Caitlin Clark's game or inhibit her special potential swiftly sensationalized the philosophical disagreement. The public's impression quickly changed from one of a unified group to one of internal conflict. The strain on coaches and players increased as every statement and subtle gesture was scrutinized. The absence of a definitive public resolution only served to fan the flames, transforming small disputes into what were believed to be significant power struggles that took place in the harsh glare.
Said some things that I think fans will like to hear, especially coming from her.
How important was it to forge that relationship with her for all the reasons?
I mean, really important. I'd had just a little bit of a relationship with Caitlin from calling her games a number of times, when she was in college, but it was very important. Look, she's obviously the centerpiece of everything that we do. And most importantly for me was just connecting and building trust. I don't know how she does what she does and handles it so gracefully. I'm not sure, myself as a 20.
Stephanie White finally got a chance to speak up about the circulating rumors when she appeared on Sue Bird's Bird's Eye View program. White refused to back down. This was her response to the perceived insults to her tactics. It was not a yelling fight, but rather a forceful and unyielding statement of her coaching philosophy. She emphasized how crucial it was to develop a close, trustworthy connection with Clark, not just as a celebrity, but also as a player who need challenge and development, in the face of public scrutiny. White's statements were a clear strategic response that laid down her unyielding coaching tenets and asserted her authority and vision.
But I'm going to be honest, and I think that I certainly appreciate that about her. And I'm also the same kind of psycho that she is in terms of competitiveness. Now it comes out in different ways. But we both just really want to win and we want to set ourselves and our teammates up for success. And so it was really important for me, right away with her.
So a few important things I think that were said there. Number one was she's the centerpiece of everything that we do. So that will be received really well out there amongst CCFC. And it's right? Everybody knows that, both on the basketball court and from the business.
White made a strong remark on the show that at first appeared to go against the developing controversy. She is undoubtedly the focal point of everything we do. This was a recognition of Clark's indisputable significance as a corporate leader and on the court, but her solid underlying coaching concept came just after this seemingly accommodating statement that I really think that your finest players need to be challenged and coached. This was not a retreat. It was an assertion. According to White, Clark's position as the focal point did not shield her from intense instruction. It actually required it to establish a distinct boundary.
Kind of having to get through to her a little bit because she had a little bit of that Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant DNA in her. And that's a great combination. So it's exciting to see how it goes going forward, because they didn't have a chance. They like each other. They trust each other. They're both great at what they do. So it's hard to see it not working out. And Caitlin, seeing what the team was able to do without her, um, that's got to be helpful in a certain sense to know what they're capable of. And then them knowing what they're capable of without her, and then knowing what she is capable of.
White made no effort to soften her stance on coaching. She portrayed herself as a brutally honest, fully transparent leader, someone whose direct approach might unsettle players but was, in her view, essential for building real trust. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a firm expectation for everyone on her roster, especially her star player. Her message was unmistakable: no mind games, no hidden motives. If a player needed clarity, they were expected to speak up. This unwavering devotion to blunt honesty, one of the foundations of her leadership, served as her pointed rebuttal to any perceived challenges to her authority, demanding the same level of straightforwardness in return. But the most striking remark came when she openly admitted, "I'm also the same kind of psycho she is when it comes to competitiveness." It wasn't a throwaway line. It was a direct statement of equal intensity, a declaration that she matched Clark's hunger to win step for step. Their competitive fire might look different, but White was signaling to Clark and everyone watching that she possessed the same ruthless drive for success. In her view, any friction between them wasn't personal. It was simply the natural collision of two fierce, obsessive competitors fighting for the best path forward. Despite all the public statements and philosophical back and forth, the on-court partnership between White and Clark never truly had the opportunity to develop. Clark's season was derailed by injuries. First an ankle issue, then a groin injury that ultimately ended her year, robbing them of the chance to fully mesh their styles. The intriguing possibility of blending their two basketball philosophies remained mostly theoretical, leaving behind an empty space, a lingering what if that only heightened the weight of their earlier comments. With no real on-court resolution, every sharp remark and philosophical clash felt even more meaningful, intensifying speculation about whether their visions could ever align. Clark, of course, had long shown flashes of quiet rebellion toward restrictive coaching. Early in her career, she famously compared her deep three-pointers at Iowa to Steph Curry's and insisted, "You don't tell Steph Curry not to shoot those." That line revealed her core mindset, an unwavering belief in her own instincts and a natural resistance to being boxed in or held back. This earlier jab at conventional coaching philosophies foreshadowed how Clark would respond to White's directions, reinforcing the pattern of a player who relies on her instincts above everything else. It showed she was no stranger to standing firm, even when it meant pushing back against long-established basketball norms. White's coaching approach, meanwhile, focused on very specific areas where she believed Clark needed to grow, improving her off-ball movement, becoming a more effective catch-and-shoot option, and recognizing when to hand over control to her teammates. These weren't minor adjustments. They were foundational changes that challenged Clark to expand beyond her ball-dominant identity. White's insistence on these points became her sharp counter, a firm demand for evolution that subtly pushed back against Clark's earlier claims about knowing her own best style. It was a clear strategic response. A significant turning point, and another quiet snap from White, came when the Fevers started winning without Caitlin Clark. Even with Clark limited or sidelined, the team suddenly clicked, putting together multiple victories in a row. This stretch undeniably showcased White's coaching ability and the overall strength of the roster she was shaping. It was a powerful statement in itself. It became an undeniable display that White's system could succeed even without its brightest star performing at full strength. While Clark genuinely supported those wins, that stretch also quietly reinforced the validity of White's philosophy, proving the team's potential when operating as a unified whole. Adding to the complexity of Clark's resistance is her legendary competitive fire, often likened to the Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant mentality. Iowa coaches Lisa Blutter and Jan Jensen have openly described the challenge of reaching her because of that fierce, occasionally stubborn competitive streak. This built-in psycho-competitiveness, which White openly admitted she shares, explains why Clark sometimes pushes back or reacts sharply to coaching ideas she interprets as restricting her pursuit of victory. It isn't hostility. It's an unshakable self-belief born from the same obsessive drive that fuels the greats. Even harmless remarks from White were magnified into perceived jabs at Clark, intensifying the pressure woven into their already delicate dynamic.